The year was 1967. The U.S. was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and many citizens wondered why troops were sent there and exactly why they were fighting. And this year, many black and brown individuals raised their voices, crying out to their country, dismayed on being sent away. It was this year, 1967, that you may remember Muhammad Ali was convicted for refusing to fight in the war, stating, "Why should they ask me to put on a uniform and go 10,000 miles away from home and drop bombs and bullets on brown people in Vietnam while so-called black people in America are treated like dogs?" It was the same year, 1967, when Martin Luther King Jr. stood in the pulpit of Riverside Church and delivered one of his most memorable sermons, Beyond Vietnam, a time to break silence. In this powerful address, Dr. King speaks out against the war, asserting that the United States' involvement in conflicts is immoral and unjust. And he connects the war to broader issues of poverty, racial inequality, and the need for social justice. King emphasizes that his opposition for the war is rooted in human rights, nonviolence, and peace. And he argues that the U.S. government should redirect its resources from military violence to addressing systemic issues and inequalities to right here at home. But one of the greatest things that King does in this speech is that he calls for the American public to break their silence and to take a stand, highlighting a moral responsibility to speak out against injustice. If you've never read or watched the sermon, it is worth your time. In one portion of the speech, King states, "For the sake of the boys, for the sake of this government, and for the sake of the hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent." We are now faced with the fact, my friends, that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now, that in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare and naked and dejected with the loss of opportunity. The tide in affairs of men does not remain at flood, but it ebbs. And we may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage. But time is adamant to every plea and rushes on over bleached bones and jumbled residues of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, "Too late." There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance, or our neglect. The prophet Isaiah knows a little bit about what King is talking about. Or should I say vice versa? Isaiah 62 finds itself in the placement of third Isaiah, Trito Isaiah, which is the third portion of the book of Isaiah, chapters 56 through 66. It's believed to be written by a different prophet than the other two portions. Whereas in 2nd Isaiah, we find in the year of 539 that King Cyrus of Persia finally ends the exile. And it's in this same portion that God promises the people that they would not go back to normal, but to go back to something greater, to something better than what they had before. However, the reality of the people and the situation was not that. While some remained in Judah for all of their years of exile, others were taken away, sent to a new place. But the work of 50 to 60 years done by those in power could not be undone. This is why the people are filled with lament. And today we do not rush past it to go to the glory at the end of the passage, but we sit in the lament because far too often we rush past Good Friday to get to Easter morn. Far too often, we don't understand the pain within us, within our community, within our country, within our actual land that is happening. And we neglect when life feels like a desert and say, it'll just be fine. And sometimes we must sit in the place of lamentations and be honest with how we feel. As one scholar notes, Isaiah's lamentation fits the complications of life. After the joy of Christmas and the hope of the new year have faded, we notice that life hasn't changed much. God still seems far away at times. Corruption and evil seem just as strong and intractable, and the church seems divided. Lamentation expresses a longing between Advent and Christmas's promise and the reality that we encounter. Isaiah 62 begins with an unknown and unnamed speaker. For some, they suggest that it is God bringing reassurance to the people, but it's more likely an unnamed, unknown prophet speaking. This prophet is determined to speak a message of righteousness and salvation, to prove itself, to come forward. And while the entirety of the passage is one that is worth a deep dive, one that moves the people out of their lament, I cannot find myself moving away from the first verse. I will not keep silent. I will not rest. I will not keep still. And it is important we as Christian people follow the prophet's command and do the same, proclaiming we will not resist the urge to be silent about things that matter. We cannot be silent about things, just as King argued in the 60s when we are sending resources abroad that are destroying entire populations while failing to address systemic inequalities right here. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. I recognize that silence is a self-discipline and solitude is an act that we must observe. But when it comes to injustice, silence is not the practice we must observe. For liberation to be obtained, we must speak and act and never procrastinate. And you must ask yourself, is our silence worth the lamentations and the hardships of others? Is your silence abandoning others because the injustice and harm and decrees of those in power do not affect you? There is danger in silence, a danger in removing ourselves from the equation, which the prophet realizes. It says, no more shall we let it be. I believe King understood the prophet when he said there comes a time when silence is betrayal. Our lives begin to end the day that we become silent about things that matter. In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. May today you be the day that you say, I will not rest. I will not keep silent. I will not keep still. The year was 1963. He went up to the podium and stared out into the sea of people. Odetta had just sung, "Oh Freedom," and the people were ready to go to hear Martin Luther King give a speech. But before he gives his speech, Rabbi Prince gets up to speak. Dr. Prince devoted much of his life to the civil rights movement. And while serving as president of American Jewish Congress, he represented the Jewish community as an organizer of the March on Washington, where he is now at the podium to speak. Finally, a hush comes over the sea of people. And he states, when I was the rabbi of a Jewish community in Berlin under Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned under those tragic circumstances was not that bigotry and hatred are the most urgent problem. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people in which had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, in the face of mass murder. And America must not become a nation of onlookers. America must not remain silent. It must speak up and act, from the president down to the humblest of us, for the sake of the image, for the idea and the aspiration of America itself. Our children, yours and mine, in every school across the land each morning pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and the republic for which it stands. They, the children, speak fervently and innocently of this land as the land of liberty, justice for all. Liberty and justice for all. Tomorrow is not just Martin Luther King Day, but also Inauguration Day, when a new administration will begin. There are many Americans who are excited, and then there are many who are lamenting and fearful of what the next 4 years will bring and at what cost. No matter the politician, no matter the party, we must echo the prophet's words, for the sake of our land, I won't keep silent. We have a priority to make sure that the words the children speak come to fruition: liberty and justice for all. For the sake of women, I won't keep silent as bodies are being litigated and legislated, as churches and leaders silence women and say they are not equal among us. For the sake of our trans siblings, I won't keep silent as hate and misinformation is spread at their expense. For the sake of our LGBTQIA plus members and community, I won't keep silent as their rights are taken away because we choose fear rather than to educate ourselves. For the sake of our children, I won't keep silent as they learn how to hide in schools while adults are unable to regulate and legislate a gun. But words on a paper are regulated and legislated, book bans happening for the fear of what may come at their life because of words. For the sake of black and brown people, I won't keep silent, still being used as pawns, bodies beaten, brutality and myths pervading the system. For the sake of immigrants, I won't keep silent, the tired and the weary fleeing violence, working hard and doing jobs that many of us would never do to better our country. The same immigrants having to attend classes to prepare what would happen if they are taken away by ICE while their children are in school. For the sake of prisoners, I won't keep silent who sit in a system that is more closely related to slavery than it is to rehabilitation. We use them to fight fires for $10 or less a day, but sadly refuse to see them worthy of second chances in our community. For the sake of our earth, I won't keep silent as she blazes and cries and floods, and we forget God's command to take care of her. For the sick and unable to receive medical assistance because of the cost, for the struggling to get by when minimum wage is nothing in rising economy, for those experiencing hunger, for those experiencing poverty, I will not keep silent, because that's not the best we can do. And because God calls us to do more, God calls us not to be silent, but to speak and not to rest. I know you heard the quote, for first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I did not speak because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was nobody left to speak for me. We must speak. We must act. And we must never be silent in the face of injustice. Amen.